And I'd like to thank you, Jennifer, for all your behind the scenes magic that you work there, and Kern Family Foundation and Keen for making this series possible. And then also all of you for joining this discussion today. We have a great discussion lined up for you today. Let me just let you know a couple things that are going on, and a sketch of how the hour will go, and then we'll just get started. So in addition to today's live discussion on character education, Wake Forest University is hosting a conference that's getting started later this afternoon. This evening, there's a talk with Colin Powell and Madeline Albright coming into the talk this evening. I'll just post that information in the chat. This is a theme that is popping up and showing a great deal of vitality right now. And so we're glad to be in the middle of it. So I'm going to pass it in a moment to Don Weinkauf, with Dean of School of Engineering at St. Thomas, and just some bit of where we've been, where we are, and where the pathways might be ahead of us. And then Don is going to introduce another guest, Michael Naughton, who's with us also from University of St. Thomas. And that introduction will come a little later. Then they'll have a little some presentation, some discussion. And then we have set up we'll have some small group discussion and then come back and see what we pick up from that. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to you, Don.
All right. Well, thanks, Doug. And again, I think that the important thing here is to recognize that this is part of a continuing conversation that we're having around character and the evolution of virtue ethics in our work as engineering educators. And again, I just want to take a few minutes because I think, and I'm looking forward to introducing my colleague, Dr. Mike Naughton from our Center for Catholic Studies. But I thought I would give some context because we've started a few of these conversations and all at Wake Forest. Thank you for joining us as well. There's been sort of this I would say organic formation around this area, and I would like to sort of bring that maybe take a step back and why are we starting these conversations and what the impact is, and then again introduce Mike to talk a little bit about our philosophy here at St. Thomas in this area, as well as his directions in the development of a new course, which we're calling the mission of the engineer. So with that, let me just maybe take a step back for all of us as engineering educators to talk about the work that we do together. So when I'm talking about introductory statements to any endeavor that we embark upon in the School of Engineering at St. Thomas, I sometimes show this sort of golden circle model that I think Simon Sinek has popularized. And I don't want to go through all of this. But the center point here is that there are things that we do, and that's what Simon calls the what, and then there's how we do it. But then at the core of what we do is we have to have this sort of central belief, a central question, if you will, that we use to guide the direction that we have. And the statement that we've come to at St. Thomas is that among our faculty and staff, we believe that we are principally responsible for the transformational educational experience, which fosters a unique mindset and skill set that, again, with the ultimate goal of positively impacting the work of our graduates and the society that they serve. I mean, that is the central question. And so in essence, we're in the business of getting better at creating better engineers to serve society and improve the lives of people. So that's the central focus. And I'm very grateful for the Kern Family Foundation and the Keen Network because we're leveraging those funds to do this very thing. The essence is getting better because we're in this business of creating better engineers. So in regard to what this means in terms of character and virtue ethics, I would like to add some honey to the pot here to attract more people in the network to this idea. First of all, there's sort of three major points here. And that is that a lot of people have studied what character and virtue ethics or ethics mean inside of organizations. So groups and teams and organizations, the general consensus is if you study this and those groups and teams and organizations which value character, they simply perform better. They perform better at what they do. They make better decisions. They achieve other goals. They innovate more rapidly. And those of you who might be interested in this, the more contemporary book is Dan Coyle's book called The Culture Code that we've shared amongst our team at the University of St. Thomas. And while that's not directly related to character and virtue ethics, some of the things he says about these common teams that are innovators and make better decisions is that they have a culture of safety, vulnerability, and purpose. And again, we might wrap some of that into the very discussions that we're having around character and virtue ethics. And a study that we've also talked about amongst our group is that working engineers actually value character, perhaps even above technical skills. Whether it's employer surveys or annual reviews, those are very, I would say, revealing. But one of the studies that I love was a study in the early journals of engineering education, which involved feedback from 7,000 working engineers, which rated character #1 in terms of being an effective engineer. And by the way, in that same survey of those 7 skill sets, engineering technical skills and theoretical skills were the bottom 2 of those 7 general characteristics. And you know what? That study was published in 1916. So we've known as engineering educators for the last 100 years that this is what's going to take to create better engineers. But I think if we really were honest and look at ourselves in terms of what does that mean and what we've done with that information, I'm talking about nationally. I mean, obviously we have a very select audience here, but nationally we have not done a good job in advancing this very important part of what's being effective engineers. And the third point that I'd like to it's really on a personal level, is that character amplifies trust. And if any of your group discussions that you've talked about in your own organizations, trust is so key. It's so key to advancing the work of your organization. And one of the things that I would ask you is if we, as we know as engineers, that there's 100 or even 1,000 possible solutions to every problem, whose ideas do you think are going to advance when there's engineering teams that are involved? Those with strong character and have trust, or those without? And so if we want our engineers to be the best engineers, clearly I would say that our work as engineering educators needs to involve the development of strong character as a key trait. So our job is to create better engineers, and strong character is a key trait of being a better engineer. I think that means that the direction seems to be clear. The solution approaches across all of our campuses that are here, in this meeting, they vary. I think Olga and her team has done a very good job of sort of categorizing them. There's schools that involve engineering codes of ethics, and there's schools that use separate engineering ethics courses, or actually ethics courses, more on the philosophy or theology side. And then there's some schools that have joint courses on character and ethics. And I think we've seen some of that in the work at Wake Forest. And I would strongly encourage the members of the that are here today to look at not only at the Wake Forest paper that I believe is up on the Keen Network as a common reading site, but also the white paper that a group of about 10 universities have gotten together just to sort of capture the essence of what we're looking at. So there are network conversations going on involving experts with knowledge that I would say, as a naive philosopher and theologian, this is a domain of study which has only got several thousand years of backing. And if you compare that to where we are with engineering thermodynamics, which I believe is a field of study of about 200 years old, I think we have to pay deference to what the whole field of philosophy and character development and virtue ethics could bring to our conversations of again, our domain of creating better engineers. And so with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mike Naughton, who is our director for Center for Catholic Studies here at the University of St. Thomas. And we've been talking for years about this issue. I love the idea that the metaphor that Mike has come up with as we've talked about how to, just have the idea of character and virtue ethics permeate through our work in the School of Engineering at St. Thomas. We call it the yeast. We want it to be the yeast, not the icing, not the cherry on top, not something extra, not something that really adds to this concept of the divided life where we have people who say, oh, that's the ethics part, but then this is the engineering part. These can't be separate. We can't fall into the trap of a divided life. But Mike is the director, as I said, of Center for Catholic Studies here at the University of St. Thomas, and he holds the Koch Chair of Catholic Studies. He is author of multiple manuscripts and is the co-editor of 12 books and monographs on this field, with particular emphasis on the idea of vocation of our disciplines and meaningful work. He serves on multiple boards, including an engineering and manufacturing company here in the Twin Cities, which I think he's going to draw on for his comments today. And maybe more importantly, he's also a parent. His son, Noel Naughton, actually went through our mechanical engineering program here at St. Thomas and now has recently completed his PhD at the University of Illinois in mechanical engineering. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. And Mike, just tell me when I should stop sharing.
You can stop sharing now, Don. That'd be great.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, Don. And what a joy to be at the University of St. Thomas, and particularly working with Don. He's been a great leader here at the university, particularly on all these topics. Maybe to grasp the importance of this idea of character, ethics, and engineering, let me tell you an unfortunate event that happened to me when I was a teenager. I was about 16. I was living on the south side of Chicago. Both my parents are from Ireland. And I was walking out the door one day on a Saturday night, and my father, who was a bit tired of some of the things that were going on in my life, in his Irish brogue, he looked at me and says, Michael, you be a good boy, Michael. And I said, sure, Dad, whatever, as a teenager would say to his father. But before I could take another step, he looked at me and says, but Michael, if you can't be good, you be careful. I said, all right, I think I can do that. Well, actually, I didn't do that, and my father had to pick me up from a Chicago police station that evening. I'll spare you the details about why. But he walked into the police station, he looked at me, he says, Michael, I think you better just be good, right? Now, I say that story, my dad and I had our own particular challenges, but this fixation on being careful. We're living in a highly utilitarian culture that basically, if we calculate, the benefits over the burdens, we think we can be careful enough, we think we can be smart enough, we think we can be technical enough, we can solve our problems and lead a great life. And the fact is, there's lots of case studies that has kind of shown that becomes a kind of a dead-end street. And it seems to me that if we're going to educate our engineers, and be quite frank, educate all our professionals in a way that a university ought to do it, the key word we need to be focusing on is the question of integration. And it's the integration of what is the best that liberal education has to offer and the best about what engineering professional education has to offer. And it seems to me that this task of integration is actually one of the greatest challenges facing universities today, in particular the modern university. Because in one sense, we have to ask ourselves, how well are we doing? And that, I think sometimes we can find some places where there's some great success, and I think other places we can probably say there's been some real challenges. And that raises a question about the nature of the university in general, right? Is it merely to simply provide discrete, disconnected units of knowledge? Or is there something about a university that attempts to try to foster a unity of knowledge? Again, some challenges here that we have. And so this relationship between liberal and engineering education, I think, fosters a powerful form of what we can talk about in terms of character education and the necessary virtues for an engineer, and particularly here, a professional engineer. Now, there's lots of reasons that we can argue about why we want to foster it. Don talked about some of them. But I must say, I have found one of the most pithy phrases from an old book. It's called the Guanzi. It's a Chinese book, an ancient book, 2,700 years old, from the Taoist and Confucian tradition. And here's what it says. It says that when a person's virtue is not equal to his position, all will suffer. Right? It's a powerful line. That was said 2,700 years ago. By the way, you can also go back to ancient Greece and find similar statements. There's something about this issue, about our position and our virtue. And one of the challenges is that, and this has been my experience with my students, is that we can sometimes undervalue or misvalue our position, right? This happens for lots of reasons. Be quite frank, some people just simply grow tired of the ordinary. They fall into ruts, into the mundane, about merely just getting through things. Or we can even misvalue our position, and we get fixated on titles and achievements, all of which, be quite frank, dulls the human spirit. And what happens is we fall into small places, reducing our work either to a salary, to a technical standard, to a career title. Again, all underestimating or misunderstanding what is the good that we do in the work that we do. And so what character and virtue education is attempting to do is trying to take the most comprehensive view of things. And again, this is what a university should do for students. It should help students see things whole. It should help them to see the relationship between their position and their virtue. And it should move them from being a small soul technician to an enlarged soul professional. And so character and virtue education is working to overcome what Don mentioned, this idea of a divided life. Because the divided life often starts from the divide between liberal education and professional education. It divides the private and the public life. We divide our thoughts and our actions. We divide technical and the moral, right? All of these things are, in a sense, that is not the kind of education we want to provide. And yet sometimes we find ourselves in the modern institution dividing our students rather than helping them see things whole. Maybe one way to think about this, and again, I'm on a more personal level. I don't know if you have this in your house, but we have this thing called, I call it refrigerator wisdom. My wife puts these sayings on our refrigerator. You know, she says she's doing it for the kids. I think she's doing it for myself, right? And this one was on the refrigerator for a long time. And here's what it said. And we'll see whether it clicks. There we go. And it's about a kind of character formation or moral ecology. Watch your thoughts. They become words. Watch your words. They become actions. Watch your actions. They become habits. Watch your habits. They become character. Watch your character. It becomes your destiny. Character is not simply about good intentions. And to be quite frank, it's not even simply about good acts or being effective. But it's about the whole of life. And so it entails about how you think about things and how you speak about things. It entails about how you relate to each other. It entails about what you're becoming. And ultimately, it entails where you're going. And so what a university education should do for students is to foster this integration. A liberal education, when it's at its best, and by the way, it's not always at its best, and Don has talked to me about this, I tend to be quite frank, I tend to be more critical of the humanities and liberal education than I am about professional schools. I actually find more openness to professional schools sometimes than to humanities departments. But anyway, when a liberal education at its best, it's developing the habit of the mind to see things in relationship to each other in order to make good judgments. Don's point about good judgments, good decisions about the complex nature of the world, right? That's what a liberal education should be about. And what an engineering education should be about is about training students to the standards of the profession, to the skills necessary to carry out that profession. In engineering, and I shouldn't be telling you this, you know it far better than I do, but it takes a great deal of knowledge and skill and technique to provide the kind of professional education you need. And when you put those two together, particularly in its relationship to character and virtue formation, you get a very powerful education. Let me speak maybe for an example here. Don, I taught in the business school for about 20 years, but I've always been in both. I've been in this program we called Catholic Studies. I was also in the theology department for a while, and I also was connecting it with business. And so I've been team teaching a course for the last 25 years in the business school, and I taught it with 8 different business faculty from disciplines as wide as entrepreneurship and finance and marketing and accounting, a whole variety of different disciplines. And when I was teaching it, particularly, I remember this particularly one example that kind of shows the integration that I'm trying to talk about. This was actually an entrepreneur. He was actually a very successful entrepreneur before he got into the academy, made a lot of money, and then he went into the academy. It's kind of a good way about doing the academy. And he and I were teaching, and we got into this discussion of the virtues and character, and he knew nothing about virtue, tradition, and character education. But one of the things he captured, he was kind of really animated. He says, "That's my experience. That's exactly what my experience is." What you're talking about, the distinctions within this idea of the virtue tradition was helping him to understand what his experience is about. And what he said was beautiful. He says, virtue helps me to see when I'm at my best. And vice, by the way, is when I see myself maybe not at my best, sometimes at my worst. And so the point here is that for my colleague, the experience of the virtues was not so much a new instruction, but it was a reminder. There's a deep memory in all of us that we know what it is to be at our best. And the biggest challenge many of us have is amnesia. We forget about it. The day-to-day grind often just kind of, wears it out. And so that idea, right, that virtues are not imposing themselves upon a kind of technical, infrastructure here, but rather it's attempting to see how that technical reality can flourish within a human context. Maybe one more example, and then I'll wrap up. Don mentioned that I'm the board chair of a manufacturing company here in the Twin Cities. I've been the board chair for about 10 years, been on the board almost for 13 years now. And it's called Real Precision Manufacturing. It's a torque technology company here in Minnesota. And the founders of the company were 3 engineers who started their careers at the 3M company. And when they left 3M, like many engineers from 3M do, they start their own companies. And they were wrestling with this idea about, well, what kind of company are we going to create? It's very interesting. The word real is a German word that actually highlights what that idea that Don mentioned about trust. It actually means trust, trustworthy, right? And as they were wrestling with this, they were attempting to kind of say, what kind of company do we want to build? And they created a message of the founders. By the way, we still give this, they're long retired. One passed away, the 2 are in their upper 80s. And we still give this to new employees. But this is just one part of the message to the founders. And here's what it says. He says, we do not define profits as the purpose of the company, but we do recognize that reasonable profitability is necessary to continue in business and to reach our full potential. We see profits in much the same way that you could view food in your personal life. You probably do not define food or eating as the purpose of your life, but recognize that it is essential to maintain your health and strength so you can realize your real purpose, right? For these 3 engineers, profit is an essential reality to business, but it's a means, not an end. And this is what character and virtue do for people. It orders things, especially in terms of the relationship between means and ends. Matter of fact, I think there's a lot of virtues that are important, but I think one of the most important virtues for the professional, whether it's the engineer, the business, the doctor, whatever it is the virtue of practical wisdom, which is the ordering of effective means toward good ends, right? And so what these three engineers saw so clearly, right, is that profit is a good servant, but it's a lousy master, right? And we cheapen institutions such as business when we simply fixate on one thing, which is always the danger of the professional. They tend to fixate on one thing, right? And what we do is we demean institutions. And to be quite frank, in the university, we have the similar challenge. We get fixated on career credentialing. And so we have this vibrant, wonderful institution called business or university, and we thin out our institutions by simply focusing on only one thing. And so what these three engineers, and I've done many case studies, in fact, that's how I got to know the company, was the case studies that I did on the company, is that they were able to situate the means, the profit, within a much larger context, with a much larger purpose. And they created habits within this to create a particular kind of company. Don mentioned, I love this phrase that Don uses, right? How virtue and character amplifies trust. And when you amplify trust, you create margin. When you don't amplify trust, you reduce margin. And when you have small problems, they become very large. But if you have trust, even large problems, you can deal with them because the trust has created a margin. And when you have little character or value, and you don't have that trust, you don't have that margin, you basically have two things to talk about, two things to lean on, two levers to draw upon. And particularly when things are not going well in an organization, what you do is either reach for rules, right? When things are not going well, we got to make more rules. We have to develop more laws. We have to sign more contracts. We have to get more detailed procedures that get people to do the right thing, or simply get them not to do the wrong thing. And thus you get a proceduralism where leaders take refuge in rules and laws and policies and practices. And by the way, you know what happens? Then they don't have to make judgments. Because there's often fear within those organizations that's driving them in this area. Or if it's not rules, we draw upon incentives, right? So if things aren't going right, we basically have to incentivize people to do the right thing to get us out of the troubles that we're in. And by the way, there's tons of case stories about what our incentive systems have done to organizations. So let me conclude. Engineering education. And by the way, I'm going to teach my first course with Deb Besser, who's on this call, next spring, and I'm really excited about it. I wish I would have done this years ago, actually. But in light of all things, I'm really excited about getting into this idea of doing some team teaching with Deb, who's in the engineering program, and to deal with this and see what it starts to look like for engineering. But engineering education is best when it's embedded in the humanities, when it can draw upon a unity of knowledge that has the ability to order the technical, the instrumental realities of life, which are so important. We need these in our society, but it is to order them to a deeper purpose that's informed by character and virtue, right? And so this idea of this relationship is of so critical importance. And by the way, this is exactly what should be happening at a university. How many places have a strong liberal arts, humanities education, and a strong professional education? But unfortunately, we sometimes have become so siloed, right, that we fail to, in a sense, bring the synergies of these entities together toward the education of the students that we have with us. So, Don, I'll stop there, and I'll turn this back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. I think we're going to break out again. Thank you, not only for your comments today and your passion around this work, but also, our conversations over the last decade. Mike and I have just really been able to step back and occasionally with a beer, talk about our work, talk about our work and this drive towards creating a meaningful education for our students and an impactful education. Because we know how important this is. We know this is what drives organizations, and organizations that are thriving and are healthy because of their valuing of character and virtue. They do better things. They do better things not only from an innovative technical standpoint, but they do better things from the health of our society and in improving people's lives. So I think that this drive in this direction isn't something extra. We have a challenge as engineering educators that, as we turn to our faculty to say, this seems to be important. What are we doing? How do we reassess what we are doing? How do we add to what we're doing? We know what we're going to get here. There are so many obstacles. One of which is of my own engineering training, is I have no background in this area. And we're going to see that on our own campuses. In my background and training, we struggle with, we only have 4 years with these students. How can we possibly fit in something else? And so all of these are challenges that we face. There are obstacles to advancing this really important work. And that's the purpose of these conversations, whether it's with Dayton or it's with Wake Forest or Arizona State or St. Thomas or whoever it happens to be, or Duke. We're all contributing to this conversation to see how we can get better and share our experiences as a network, share expertise, because I think we have so many experts among our teams, not just amongst the engineering deans, but really more importantly with our liberal arts colleagues who have really a possession of the knowledge of what it's going to take. And so again, there are obstacles. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug to maybe break us out to talk a little bit more about these obstacles.
Yeah, so I'm going to, thanks, Don, and thank you, Mike, as well. I'm going to post in the chat here a question that can serve as a focus of our small discussions for maybe 9 or 10 minutes. And before sending you to the rooms, however, I'd like to invite you just to take maybe 30 seconds and jot down a thought in response to this question. And when you go into the room, maybe spend a moment first and go around to each person in the room to share something of what you've jotted down before your discussion, and then we'll circle back together. So I'll give you just a minute to ponder. Welcome back, everyone. I know that's always, even with a warning, it's an abrupt end to a conversation. But we have a few minutes left for sharing what came out of these sessions, maybe a highlight or a theme from your individual conversation, and maybe some questions for Don and Mike to share. So does anyone have something to share out first from a group?
Well, I'll jump in first, just getting a chance to talk with Olga and Amy. We didn't have enough time. It was a really rich conversation. And what's exciting to hear is that many of us are trying the same things, right? We're having these rich conversations. Olga pointed to conversations with engineers who are teaching their courses and bringing in real life examples. And Amy talked about what they're doing with grand challenges. And I think we're seeing many of the same themes, which is kind of exciting. I know Tiffany's on here, and we were looking at integrating these conversations into our freshman engineering class and then scaffolding those through. And I'm hearing that that's what other folks are doing. So this is an exciting time, and there's a hunger, I think, we're seeing from our students. They really want to have these conversations. So we'd love to have more conversations.
Thank you for sharing that, Deb. Another group, something that emerged in one of the other groups?
Yeah, I'd like Robert to share a little bit about his Cornerstone curriculum. I found that very helpful.
Be glad to. If I can just share one slide, it just captures what we've done. So again, as a Christ-centered institution, what we've done is we've rebuilt, we've gotten rid of the word general education. We have what's called the Cornerstone curriculum, and we're launching this next year, but this has already been scheduled and the courses are being built. But just to the point, the two great commandments as we see them from Jesus, but then the course numbers, but here you see the virtues and characters that have been selected that we built into the courses. And again, we have this enterprise model where the university has been de-siloed, and we have 3 enterprises: the cultural, the wellness, and the industrial enterprise that are teaching out these courses. So anyway, that's what I shared with our group as a way we've intentionally been working with across campus to embed character and really redesign a smorgasbord of general education. Just pick some courses to fill out this hole that people want to get rid of. The students come saying, let me get this out of the way. And it's like, no, we're going to make this so good, you're going to want to choose it. But we had to design it. So we had a human-centered design process that came up with this.
Robert, what school is that?
At George Fox University.
Very good. Thank you.
I think that's we talked about obstacles and barriers. We've talked about this for many, and we talk about maybe the faculty feeling uncomfortable and engaging in some of these domains. But we shouldn't underestimate, the obstacles presented by the students who, if they're coming to a university, whatever university it is, whether it's, a state university or a private institution, they also have expectations. They have some predisposition about what engineering education should be. That's why we found, at St. Thomas, that it's critically important that we approach this with a great deal of intentionality. And I think, Bob, the map that you just played out in front of them, this is going to happen, and how critically important it is. I think that's, one of those obstacles, that it's student expectations as well.
Thank you. I think we have one more group, something to share from our third group.
Yeah, I think we started, maybe went off on a tangent a little bit, talking about how character can look different in different cultures, in different spaces, and recognizing that can provide can be a unique challenge and opportunity.
Yeah, Robert, obviously you begin to raise a question, which is always kind of underlying the question of character and virtue. Is it simply relative, or is there some type of universal dimension to it? And I think you can look at that on different levels. Certainly, cultures often will take on particular characteristics of a particular form that is different from other places, and one always has to have and sometimes, a lot of times, we have a hard time understanding exactly what that form is about. I'll give you an example, right? When I've lived in Italy 5 different semesters. My first time going there, I hated Italy. I thought they were rude. I thought they were just inconsiderate. They don't believe in lines, right? And all these types of things. And I was getting so frustrated because I was coming to it with my own particular, American orderly line, efficiency dimension to it. And then what happens, of course, is that the more you start to see what's going on, you can see, well, they're not being rude, right? There's something else going on. And one of the things you start to learn, and what I've learned so well from the Italians, is the Italians know how to dine. They know the humanity of eating, right? Whereas Americans, we're a bit on the, we throw the whole thing on the plate, we eat it up, and we go off somewhere else, right? That's not dining, that's feeding, right? And so one of the things you always have to be mindful of is that sometimes when you go to another culture, it looks as though they're being, this or that, and it takes a while to get to know that culture. And then as you get to know it, you start to see something deeply human about it, of which you can share in it. And so I would say universals are not always easy to get to. My concern is that we're living in a highly relativistic culture, which actually will throw out virtue and character pretty quickly.
Agreed.
Yeah.
You know what, Mike, you just sort of hit on something that I think is important, even as we try to convince more engineering faculty to step into this space and become more proficient and more, let's just say, versed in helping these discussions with our students, in a very pragmatic sense, what you just discussed is an awareness of a problem dimension, right? That, we ask students and whether they're mechanical engineers, they've never been in a food industry or they've never been in telecommunications, whatever. All of these different industries and areas in which they're going to work all have so many complex dimensions, whether it's laws or whether it's customer acceptability or reliability. Every single problem space has its own unique dimensions to it. And I think by bringing in what you just discussed in terms of that immersion, and you're bringing in that complexity and really, this discussion of character and virtue. I mean, if you think about, ethics education is really approaching problems from every different perspective and trying to find out which is the best. I mean, that sounds like engineering education. Look at this problem from 6 different ways and let's figure out the best way to go. So
Right.
I think that there's real pragmatic components to helping our students understand more complex problems.
That's great, Don. It's exactly right. And that's why, at a university perspective, what you want to try to do is just widen it out even farther. Because what wisdom is often seeing things from its largest conceptual map, right? And that a wise person has the ability to view it in that widest conceptual way, right? Because again, while we got to specialize, and that's the strength of the university specialization, because we need to often go deeper in a particular area. The weakness of the university is specialization. And it's always the problem, isn't it? It's often the case where often our weaknesses are our strengths and our strengths are our weaknesses. And you're exactly right, Don. So an engineering school wants to make sure that we can see that in terms of complexity, but a university, right, is a place where it can see its largest sense of its complexity. Because it's engaging culture as well as technical dimensions.
All right. Well, Doug, do you want to close us out here? I think we're at
Sure.
our hour. So
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for joining and for your participation. I know it's very frustrating to have the small groups be only a short time because you're just starting. We see the momentum building, and we'd like to find ways to keep this conversation going. I want to put in a reminder again. I'm posting in the chat that Wake Forest University is also hosting a conference starting later this afternoon and then going a couple days. So if you want to keep feeding your character curiosity, you have the opportunity going forward. And with that, I just want to thank Don, thank you, Mike, and thank you, participants, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Doug.
cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.